Today we're going to use what we call systems thinking to see how the agricultural food production and population systems are interconnected. A dynamical system is one that changes all the time, and often there's something stimulating that change. Food production is an example of a dynamical system. We'll call the relationship between food production and the global population feedback. Why? Because even though both are separate dynamical systems, they are also systems that influence each other. When we put our two dynamical systems into their environment, this has an effect on the future inputs into the system and can often change the state of the system. We refer to systems in their environment as having a time-delayed feedback loop. Closed-loop systems, as in the relationship between food production and population, must act very quickly to implement an error correction without delay before the system has time to change to a different state. Systems can be described as positive or negative in terms of their feedback. Although it's labelled negative, negative feedback can allow a system to be pretty unshakable regardless of what's going on outside or inside. This is what we're aiming for in terms of our future population and food production relationship. Positive feedback loops can be negative. One factor leads to the growth of another, which in turn stimulates the first one in a repetitive, ever-increasing cycle. It can cause a system to become unstable and spiral out of control, moving further and further away from the point of equilibrium, until we reach a point called the tipping point, which is as scary as it sounds. So is the relationship between food production and population a positive or a negative feedback loop? Well, it depends. In the long term, the relationship between food production and population could be described as a positive feedback loop. For example, if the population goes up, the increase in farming more land and using more energy also goes up, placing more strain on the limited resources that our planet can provide. What is very clear is that over time, the long-term positive feedback loop has a limit. As humans continue to place a strain on the environment, global warming will limit food production capability, which will cause yet another state change. A negative feedback loop will kick in, which will cause a decrease in the population and potentially a tipping point where both the food production and population systems will enter a cascading meltdown. As the systems collapse, we will then move quickly into other human and biological system tipping points, including problems in economy, politics, society, and war. In this scenario, there will be a quick collapse and a slow recovery. Let's look a bit closer at the long-term positive feedback loop of food production and population and how we might eventually reach this tipping point. Earth has limited resources, and for the past 40 years we've been using up more than we can replenish. Fossil fuel energy has been readily available with the help of the Industrial Revolution. Following on from that came urbanization and increased levels of affluence in the Western world. This has resulted in families having more children and increased demand for food, meaning an increase in food waste. On the surface, this might all sound like a system that's working, but there's a slight problem. When the population increases, the more land is needed for the production of food. With more food production, we require more raw materials for processing it, hence creating more pollution. With distributing this food, we also create more pollution, and when food ends up on your plate and you don't eat it, it takes a journey from the bin to the landfill, creating even more pollution in the form of methane and CO2. All of this contributes to global warming. And as the rate of global warming rapidly increases, it has devastating effects on our ability to farm the land. As our ability to produce food on a global scale decreases and the population continues to increase, we head for a problematic scenario. It's that tipping point again. Earth has a maximum carrying capacity. It simply can't sustain our current levels of growth and consumption. Drained natural resources, a rapidly warming planet, plus an increase in population estimated to hit 10 billion people by the end of the century will spell disaster. Finding ways to limit population growth, farm sustainably, and manage our natural resources really does matter if we're to realise a sustainable future for the planet and for humanity.